The desert doesn't forgive, and it sure as hell doesn't forget. Caleb Thorne learned that lesson the hard way, buried it deep alongside everything else he'd rather not think about. Out here on the edge of Arizona territory, where the land stretched flat and merciless under a sun that could crack a man's resolve like cheap pottery, forgetting was the closest thing to peace a person could hope for. His ranch sat 40 miles from anywhere that mattered. No neighbors, no visitors. Just fence lines, cattle, and silence so thick you could choke on it. That's how Caleb wanted it. That's how it had been for 3 years, ever since he'd walked away from a life that nearly killed him. The morning it all changed started like any other. He woke before dawn, same as always, pulled on his boots, splashed water on his face from the basin by the window. The house was small, one room for sleeping, one for living, a kitchen that barely deserved the name. Everything functional, nothing wasted. A man living alone didn't need much. Outside, the air was still cool, that brief mercy before the heat came down like a hammer. Caleb grabbed his hat from the peg by the door and stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under his weight. He'd been meaning to fix that board for 6 months now. The cattle were stirring in the distance, dark shapes moving slow against the purple-gray horizon. He'd ride out after breakfast, check the water troughs, mend whatever fence the wind had knocked loose overnight. Same routine, day after day, year after year. That's when he saw it. A shape near the southern fence line. Too big to be a coyote. Too still to be anything living. Caleb's hand went to his hip, old instinct, but his gun belt was still hanging inside. He squinted into the dim light, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A wagon. Just sitting there, middle of nowhere, no horse hitched to it. He stood on the porch for a long moment, weighing his options. Could be someone broke down. Could be travelers who'd gotten lost and abandoned their rig. Could be nothing. But something about it made his gut tighten. He went back inside, strapped on his gun belt, and saddled his horse. The gelding, a bay named Rust, snorted and stamped, picking up on Caleb's unease. Animals knew. They always knew when something was wrong. The ride out took 10 minutes. As he got closer, details emerged from the half-light. The wagon was old but sturdy, canvas cover pulled tight over wooden ribs. No visible damage, no signs of struggle, and no tracks leading up to it, like it had just appeared there overnight, dropped from the sky. Caleb dismounted slowly, hand resting on his revolver. He'd seen enough strange things in his life to know better than to assume anything was harmless. "Hello?" His voice carried across the empty land. No answer. He circled the wagon once, looking for clues. The wheels were caked with dried mud, red clay, not the sandy dirt from around here. Wherever this thing had come from, it wasn't local. The back gate was secured with a heavy chain and padlock. Industrial. The kind you'd use for freight, not personal travel. That's when he heard it. A sound. Soft. Barely there. Breathing. Caleb's hand tightened on his gun. "Who's in there?" The breathing hitched, stopped, then started again, faster now, panicked. He moved to the back of the wagon, examining the lock. No key. He could shoot it off, but that seemed excessive. Instead, he pulled his knife from his belt and worked at the chain mounting. The wood was old, the screws half rusted. It took 3 minutes of prying before the whole assembly came loose. The gate swung open. The smell hit him first. Sweat, fear, and something else. Sickness, maybe. Or just the stench of human misery packed into a confined space. Inside the wagon, curled in the corner on a pile of straw, was a woman. She was young, maybe 25, though it was hard to tell under the dirt and bruises. Her dress was torn, filthy. Her wrists were bound with rope, raw and bleeding where she'd fought against it. Her ankles, too. And across her mouth, a strip of cloth tied so tight it had left marks on her cheeks. Her eyes, wide, dark, absolutely terrified, fixed on Caleb like he was death itself come calling. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb did something he hadn't done in a long time. He holstered his gun and raised both hands, palms out. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't believe him. Why would she? She pressed herself harder into the corner, shaking so badly the whole wagon rattled. Caleb kept his voice low, steady. "I'm going to cut those ropes. That's all. Just the ropes." He climbed into the wagon slowly, telegraphing every movement. The woman flinched when he got close, but she didn't have anywhere left to go. Her eyes followed the knife in his hand, not the gun, the knife. like that was the thing she feared most. "This is going to hurt," he said quietly, working the blade under the rope at her wrists. "The circulation's been cut off. When the blood comes back..." He cut through the fibers, and she gasped against the gag as feeling flooded back into her hands. Her fingers were swollen, purple at the tips. Caleb moved to her ankles next, sawing through the thicker rope there. Then carefully, he reached for the gag. She jerked away. "I know," he said. "I know, but you need to breathe." She stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, she stopped fighting. He untied the cloth and pulled it free. She sucked in air like a drowning woman breaking the surface, coughing, choking on it. Her whole body shook with the effort. Caleb backed off, giving her space. "Can you talk?" She didn't answer, just kept breathing, eyes locked on him. "What's your name?" "Nothing." "How'd you get here?" Still nothing. He tried a different approach. "You hurt? Besides your wrists and ankles, I mean. Are you injured?" She shook her head, barely, but it was something. "All right." Caleb climbed out of the wagon and looked around. Still no sign of whoever had brought her here. "Can you walk?" She didn't answer, but she moved, slow, painful, dragging herself toward the open gate. When she tried to stand, her legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. She recoiled from his touch like it burned. "Easy," he said again. "I've got water at the house. Food. You need both." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and said the first words she'd spoken. "You're him." Caleb frowned. "Who?" "The man who bought me." The words landed like a physical blow. "What?" Her voice was hoarse, wrecked. They said I was being delivered to a ranch, to a man named Thorne." Caleb felt the ground shift under his feet. "I didn't buy anyone. They showed me the papers." "What papers?" "The bill of sale." He stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. "Lady, I don't know who told you that, but it had your name on it." Her voice cracked. "Your signature." "That's impossible." "Then why am I here?" It was a good question. Caleb didn't have an answer. He looked at the wagon again, really seeing it now. Not just an abandoned piece of freight, a delivery. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to put this woman on his property, to make sure she ended up here, at his fence line, with his name attached. "Come on," he said. "We're going to the house." She didn't move. "You can't stay out here. Sun comes up, you'll bake. If I go with you, if you stay here, you'll die." Caleb's tone was flat, matter-of-fact. "Your choice." She looked at the empty desert around them, then back at him. The calculation was visible in her eyes. What's worse, what's less likely to kill me? Finally, she nodded. Caleb helped her onto Rust. She was so light it scared him, like she was made of paper and wire. He walked the horse back to the ranch, one hand on the reins, the other ready to catch her if she fell. She didn't speak the whole way. At the house, he helped her down and guided her inside. She moved like every step hurt, like her body was one big bruise. He pointed to the chair by the table. "Sit." She sat. He pumped water into a cup and set it in front of her. She stared at it like it might be poisoned. "It's just water." She drank. Fast at first, then slower, like she was remembering how. Caleb pulled bread and dried meat from the shelf, set it on the table, watched her devour it with the desperate efficiency of someone who hadn't eaten in days. When she was done, she looked up at him. Some of the fear had faded, replaced by exhaustion. "What's your name?" he asked again. This time she answered, "Eliza." "Eliza what?" "Just Eliza." He nodded. "I'm Caleb, and I swear to you, I didn't buy you. I didn't buy anyone. Someone's playing a game here, and I need to figure out who." She watched him, measuring. "You said there were papers," Caleb continued. "A bill of sale. Do you have them?" They kept them. "Who's they?" "The men who brought me here." "How many?" "2, maybe 3. I couldn't see well. They kept me in the dark most of the time." "How long were you in that wagon?" "I don't know. Days. I lost track." Caleb leaned against the counter, thinking. "Where were you before they took you?" Eliza's jaw tightened. "That doesn't matter." "It might." "It doesn't." He didn't push, Whatever had happened to her before this, it was clear she wasn't ready to talk about it. Did they say anything? He asked instead. The men who brought you, did they mention names, places? She thought for a moment. One of them, the one who drove most of the time, he talked to the other about making the drop. He said, Crow wants this clean, no mistakes. That's all I heard. Crow. The name hit Caleb like a fist to the chest. He turned away, gripping the edge of the counter, forcing his breathing to stay even. You know him, Eliza said. It wasn't a question. Caleb didn't answer. Who is he? Someone I used to know. What kind of someone? The bad kind. Eliza stood unsteady but defiant. If he's coming here, he's not. Caleb's voice was hard. Not yet. He'll wait. See what I do. How I react. And what are you going to do? Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd been delivered to his doorstep like cargo, who had every reason to fear him and no reason to trust him. I'm going to town, he said. I'm going to find out what the hell is going on. And you're staying here. No. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not staying here alone. You'll be safe. You don't get to decide what's safe for me. Her voice shook, but her eyes didn't. Not you. Not him. Not anyone. If you're going, I'm going. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was being stubborn and stupid and suicidal. But the look on her face stopped him. She'd been tied up, gagged, delivered like livestock, and now she was standing in a stranger's kitchen, demanding to have a say in what happened next. Maybe stubborn was exactly what she needed to be. Fine, he said, but we leave in an hour. You need rest. I'm fine. You can barely stand. I said I'm fine. Caleb recognized that tone. He'd used it himself plenty of times. The sound of someone running on fumes and pride because they'd run out of everything else. 1 hour, he repeated. Then we ride. The town of Mesquite Bend wasn't much. A main street, a handful of buildings, and enough dust to bury them all. But it had a telegraph office, a land registry, and a sheriff who owed Caleb a favor or two. They arrived mid-morning, the heat already oppressive. Eliza rode behind Caleb, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. She hadn't said a word the entire ride. He tied Russ to the post outside the land office and helped Eliza down. She wavered on her feet but stayed upright. Stay close, Caleb said. Inside, the clerk, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked up from his ledger. Help you? Need to check a record, Caleb said. Under my name, Thorne. Caleb Thorne. The clerk adjusted his glasses. What kind of record? Purchase? Recent? Last week, maybe. What'd you buy? Caleb hesitated. How the hell was he supposed to phrase this? Just check the books, he said. The clerk sighed but pulled out a thick ledger, flipping through pages. Thorne, here we are. Let's see, you bought 3 head of cattle 6 months ago. Before that there's, here's something, 5 days ago. Special delivery order, freight and handling, paid in full. Caleb's stomach dropped. Let me see that. The clerk turned the book around. There it was, in black ink. Caleb Thorne. The signature looked close enough to his own that he had to look twice to be sure it wasn't. That's not my signature. The clerk frowned. Says here you paid cash, $200. I didn't pay anything. Well, someone did, and they used your name. Eliza leaned closer, reading over Caleb's shoulder. Her breath caught. What? Caleb asked. She pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. There. The vendor. Caleb read it. Silas Crow Trading Company. Of course it was him. Where's the sheriff? Caleb asked. Probably at his office. Why? Caleb didn't answer. He was already walking out the door. Sheriff Tom Brennan was 50-something, gray-haired, and tired in the way men get when they've seen too much and stopped caring. He looked up when Caleb and Eliza walked in, his expression shifting from bored to wary. Thorne, didn't expect to see you. Need to report a crime. Brennan raised an eyebrow. What kind? Kidnapping, fraud, human trafficking. That got the sheriff's attention. He sat up straighter. That's a hell of a list. You got proof? She's the proof. Caleb nodded toward Eliza. Brennan looked at her, took in the torn dress, the bruises, the rope burns on her wrists, and his face went carefully neutral. "Ma'am, you all right?" Eliza didn't answer. "She was brought to my ranch in a wagon," Caleb said, "bound and gagged. Someone forged my name on a purchase order, made it look like I bought her." Brennan leaned back in his chair. "And who'd do a thing like that?" Silas Crow. The sheriff's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Maybe fear. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." "You got evidence?" "The ledger at the land office. The wagon's still on my property, and you've got a witness sitting right here." Brennan looked at Eliza. "That true, ma'am? What he's saying?" She nodded slowly. "And you're willing to testify to that?" "Yes." Brennan was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. "Problem is," he said, not turning around, "Silas Crow's a respected businessman, runs freight all over the territory, got contracts with half the territory. If you're accusing him of something like this, you better be damn sure." "I am sure. Because if you're wrong, he'll bury you in lawsuits. And if you're right," Brennan finally turned to face them. "Well, that's a different kind of buried." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "So you're not going to do anything?" "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying tread carefully." Brennan's voice was low. "Crow's got reach. Men on his payroll. Some of them wear badges." "You one of them?" The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Watch yourself, Thorne." "Just asking. I enforce the law. That's my job. But the law's got limits, and Crow knows how to work inside them." Caleb stepped closer. "A woman was kidnapped and delivered to my property like freight. That's not working inside the law. That's breaking it." "Then prove it." Brennan crossed his arms. "Bring me something solid. Evidence, witnesses, documents, and I'll act. But right now, all you've got is a story and a woman who could have gotten those bruises anywhere." Eliza flinched like she'd been slapped. Caleb's hand moved toward his gun. Brennan saw it. "Don't. She's telling the truth." "Maybe. But truth and proof aren't the same thing. You know that." Caleb did know that. He'd learned it the hard way years ago, when truth hadn't been enough to save the people he cared about. "Fine," he said. "I'll get you proof." "You do that." Brennan sat back down, already dismissing them. "And Thorne? Be smart about this. Crow doesn't like people poking into his business." "I don't give a damn what Crow likes." "Then you're a fool." Outside, the sun was brutal. Eliza leaned against the wall, looking pale. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "He didn't believe me." "He believed you. He just doesn't care." "What's the difference?" Caleb didn't have a good answer for that. They walked back to the horse in silence. Caleb helped Eliza up, then mounted behind her. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Back to the ranch." "And then?" "Then I figure out how to fight a man who owns half the law." "How do you do that?" Caleb urged Rust into a walk, heading out of town. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'll think of something." Behind them, Mesquite Bend shrank into the distance, and the desert opened up like a wound. That night, Caleb sat on his porch while Eliza slept inside. She'd collapsed almost immediately after they got back, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. He'd given her his bed and made a place for himself out here, under the stars. Sleep wasn't coming easy. His mind kept circling back to the name in that ledger. Silas Crow. They'd crossed paths before, years ago, back when Caleb was a different man living a different life. Back when he'd been stupid enough to think he could make a difference. Crow ran freight then too, but his real business, the one everyone knew about but nobody talked about, was moving people. Not passengers. Product. Men, women, children, anyone desperate or unlucky enough to fall into his net. Caleb had tried to stop him once. It hadn't gone well. He'd lost people. Good people. And Crow had walked away clean, protected by money and men who asked fewer questions than they should have. That's when Caleb left. Came out here. Built a life that didn't touch anyone else's, and now Crow had dragged him back in. Why? Revenge? A message? Or was Eliza just collateral? A piece in a game Caleb didn't understand yet? He didn't know. But he knew one thing for certain: Crow wouldn't stop. Men like him never did. They pushed until someone pushed back hard enough to make them bleed. Caleb had tried walking away once. It hadn't worked. Maybe it was time to try something else. Inside the house, Eliza stirred, crying out in her sleep. Caleb stood, started toward the door, then stopped. She didn't need him. She needed safety, peace, things he wasn't sure he could give. But he could give her a chance to fight back, to reclaim what had been taken from her. And maybe, in the process, he could reclaim something too. He looked out at the dark desert, at the stars burning cold and distant overhead. Somewhere out there, Crow was waiting. Let him wait. When the time came, Caleb would be ready. Morning came too fast and brought no answers. Caleb woke on the porch with his back screaming at him and the sun already climbing. He'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, broken into fragments by the sound of Eliza moving around inside, restless and hurting. Every time she cried out, he'd gone still, listening, waiting to see if she needed help. She never called for him. He stood now, working the stiffness out of his shoulders, and looked toward the fence line where that damn wagon still sat. In daylight, it looked even more wrong, like a scar on the landscape, a reminder of how quickly his carefully constructed isolation had collapsed. The door creaked behind him. Eliza stood in the doorway wearing the same torn dress from yesterday. Her hair was a mess, her face pale, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been. She'd found some water, washed the worst of the grime away. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Some." "Liar." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. "You hungry?" "Always." He made coffee and fried eggs while she sat at the table, watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Like she was trying to figure out what kind of man he was, whether the danger she knew was worse than the danger she didn't. "You said you knew Crow," she finally said. Caleb cracked another egg into the pan. "I did." "How?" "We crossed paths long time ago." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting right now." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's going to come here." "Probably." "When?" "When he's ready." Caleb slid eggs onto 2 plates, set one in front of her. "Could be today, could be next week." Crow likes to let things simmer, makes people nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that get them killed or locked up." He sat down across from her. Either way, Crow wins. Eliza picked up her fork, then set it down again without eating. "The sheriff won't help." "No." "So what do we do?" Caleb took a bite of egg, chewed, swallowed. "We make ourselves harder to kill than we are to ignore." "How?" "I'm still working on that part." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. The smart play was to put Eliza on a horse, send her east or west or anywhere that wasn't here, and pretend none of this had happened. Let Crow come, find nothing, and eventually lose interest. But Caleb knew men like Crow didn't lose interest. They escalated. And if Eliza ran, she'd be running for the rest of her life, however long that turned out to be. "Eat," he said. "Then we're going back into town." "Why? The sheriff already—" "Not for the sheriff, for the land office. I want to see that ledger again, see what else might be in there." "You think there's more?" "There's always more." They finished breakfast in silence. Eliza ate slowly, mechanically, like food was just fuel and she'd forgotten what taste was. When she was done, she looked at him. "I need different clothes." Caleb glanced at her dress, torn at the shoulder, stained with dirt and blood. She was right. "I don't have anything that'll fit you. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for functional." He went to the chest at the foot of his bed, dug through layers of old shirts and work pants until he found something that might work. A shirt that had belonged to someone else, once. Someone smaller. He'd kept it for reasons he didn't examine too closely. "Try this," he said, tossing it to her. She caught it, held it up. "Whose was this?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Someone who's gone. That's all you need to know." Eliza studied him for a moment, then nodded. She disappeared into the other room to change. When she came back, she'd paired the shirt with her own skirt, torn shorter to keep from dragging in the dirt. It wasn't pretty, but it was practical. "Better," Caleb said. "It'll do." They saddled Rust and headed back toward Mesquite Bend. The ride was quieter today, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The sun beat down relentless, turning the air into something you had to push through just to breathe. Halfway there, Eliza spoke. If we can't prove what Crow did, what then? Caleb didn't answer right away. He'd been asking himself the same question all night. Then we prove something else, he finally said. Like what? Like he doesn't own me. Or you. Or anyone else he thinks he can buy and sell. That's not proof. That's just defiance. Sometimes that's all you've got. Eliza was quiet after that. When they reached town, the street was busier than yesterday. Wagons rolling through, people going about their business, the sounds of commerce and life. Normal, like the world hadn't just cracked open. Caleb tied Rust outside the land office again. Inside, the same clerk looked up, his expression souring when he recognized them. You again. Need another look at that ledger, Caleb said. Why? Because I'm asking. The clerk sighed but pulled out the book. You've got 5 minutes. I'm busy. Caleb flipped to the page with his name, studied the entry more carefully this time. The signature was good. Too good. Whoever had forged it knew his handwriting well enough to mimic the slant, the pressure, the way his capital T looped. Who witnessed this? Caleb asked, pointing to a blank space where a witness signature should have been. The clerk leaned over. Huh. That's odd. What is? There should be a witness. All transactions over $50 require one. But this? He frowned. This was filed without it. How's that possible? It's not, unless... The clerk stopped himself. Unless what? Unless someone with authority waived the requirement. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. Who has that authority? The registrar, or the circuit judge. Who's the registrar? Man named Hodge, but he's been out of town for 2 weeks. Won't be back until next month. And the judge? The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Judge Farrow. But he doesn't handle land transactions directly. He just oversees... Where do I find him? He's usually at the courthouse on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But look, I don't think... Caleb was already heading for the door. Wait, the clerk called after him. What about the ledger? Keep it. I've seen enough. Outside, Eliza was waiting. Well, she asked. The transaction was approved without a witness. Someone with pull made that happen. Who? Maybe the judge. Maybe someone else. Either way, Crow's got people protecting him. So what do we do? Caleb looked down the street toward the courthouse, a 2-story building with peeling paint and windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. We go ask some uncomfortable questions. They walked together, the dust kicking up around their boots. People watched them pass. Not openly, but Caleb felt the eyes. Small towns were like that. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers stuck out. Eliza stuck out especially. A woman in men's clothing, bruised and walking beside a man who kept his hand near his gun. People would talk. Let them. The courthouse doors were open. Inside, the air was cooler but stale, smelling of old paper and older wood. A woman sat at a desk near the entrance, writing something in a ledger. Help you? She asked without looking up. Looking for Judge Farrow, Caleb said. He's in session. When's he done? Hour, maybe 2. She glanced up, took in Caleb and Eliza, and her expression shifted. You got business with the court? We do. You can wait outside. He doesn't like to be interrupted. Caleb considered pushing, then decided against it. Making enemies of courthouse staff was a quick way to get nowhere. We'll wait, he said. They sat on a bench in the hallway. Time crawled. Eliza fidgeted, picking at a loose thread on her skirt. Caleb watched the door to the courtroom, listening to the muffled voices inside. After what felt like forever, the door opened and people began filing out. A man in a worn suit and wire-rimmed glasses emerged last, carrying a stack of papers. He was 50-ish, thin, with the look of someone who'd spent too many years indoors. Judge Farrow? Caleb stood. The judge looked at him. Yes? Need a word, it's important. Farrow glanced at Eliza, then back to Caleb. Regarding? A transaction, one that was approved without proper documentation. The judge's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I handle a lot of transactions. This one involved my name and a forged signature. Farrow was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My office. 5 minutes. He walked away, leaving them standing there. The woman at the desk gave them directions. Second floor, last door on the right. They climbed the narrow staircase, the wood creaking under their weight. Pharaoh's office was small and cluttered. Books lined the walls, papers covered the desk. The judge sat behind it, hands folded. "Close the door," he said. Caleb did. "Now, explain." Caleb laid it out, short, direct, no embellishment. The wagon. Eliza. The forged ledger entry. The missing witness signature. Pharaoh listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, the judge leaned back in his chair. "That's quite a story. It's the truth. Truth and evidence. I know. They're not the same thing. I've heard that already." Pharaoh's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You've talked to Brennan." "I have." "And he told you to tread carefully." "He did. Smart advice. I'm not interested in smart. I'm interested in right." The judge studied him for a long moment. Then he looked at Eliza. "You're the woman from the wagon." She nodded. "You're willing to testify to what happened?" "Yes." "Under oath?" "Yes." Pharaoh sighed. "That'll make things complicated." "Why?" Caleb asked. "Because if what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it isn't, then you're accusing a man with considerable resources and influence of a federal crime, human trafficking. That's not something I can adjudicate at the territory level. That goes to a federal court." "Then send it to a federal court." "It's not that simple. I'd need enough evidence to justify that action. Right now, all you have is testimony. No witnesses besides yourselves. No physical proof linking Crow directly to the crime. The wagon could belong to anyone, could have been stolen. And the forged signature?" Pharaoh shook his head. "Without a handwriting expert and documentation proving the forgery, it's just your word against a ledger entry." Caleb felt frustration rising. "So you're saying there's nothing you can do?" "I'm saying the system requires more than accusations. It requires proof." "She is proof." "She's a witness." "That's not the same thing." Pharaoh looked at Eliza. "I believe you, ma'am, for what it's worth. But belief doesn't hold up in court. Facts do." Eliza's hands were shaking. She'd wrapped them together in her lap, squeezing tight. Caleb stepped closer to the desk. "What if we could get you facts? What would you need?" Pharaoh considered. "Documentation linking Crow to the transaction. Witnesses who can testify to his involvement. Ideally, someone on the inside willing to turn. And if we get that, then I file with the federal prosecutor. But understand, Crow will fight back. He'll use every legal tool he has, and some that aren't legal." "I'm not afraid of Crow." "Maybe you should be." Pharaoh's voice was quiet. "Men like him don't lose gracefully." Caleb held the judge's gaze. "Neither do I." They left the courthouse with no more answers than they'd come with, just a clearer picture of how steep the climb was. Outside, the sun was past its peak but still punishing. Eliza leaned against the courthouse wall, looking drained. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "No, but I'm still standing." "That's something." "Is it?" She looked at him. "Everyone keeps telling us what we can't do, what we can't prove, how powerful Crow is. At what point do we admit this is impossible?" "It's not impossible." "How do you know?" "Because impossible would mean Crow already won, and he hasn't, not yet." Eliza pushed off the wall. "So what's the plan?" "We find someone who knows Crow's operation, someone who can give us what Pharaoh needs." "And where do we find that person?" Caleb thought about it. Crow ran freight, which meant warehouses, loading docks, drivers, clerks. Somewhere in that network was someone with loose lips or a guilty conscience. "We start with the freight depot," he said. "See who's working today. Ask questions. Crow's people will recognize you." "Good. Let them." They walked toward the edge of town where the freight operations clustered. Large buildings with wide doors, wagons coming and going, the smell of dust and sweat and horse manure heavy in the air. The main depot bore a sign, Crow Trading Company. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "You sure about this?" Eliza asked. "No, but we're doing it anyway." Inside, the depot was chaos. Men shouting, crates being moved, paperwork being shuffled. A broad-shouldered man with a beard saw them enter and walked over. "Help you?" Looking for information, Caleb said. What kind? The kind about a delivery made 5 days ago, to a ranch outside town. The man's expression hardened. Don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you should leave. Caleb didn't move. Delivery was made under my name, without my authorization. That's fraud. Take it up with the law. I'm taking it up with you. The man stepped closer, dropping his voice. You're making a mistake coming here. Not the first time. Walk away, while you still can. Other workers had stopped what they were doing, watching now. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Eliza touched Caleb's arm. Maybe we should... No. Caleb kept his eyes on the bearded man. Not until I get answers. You won't get them here. Then where? The man hesitated. For just a second, something crossed his face, doubt maybe, or fear. Nowhere, he finally said. Now get out. Caleb turned to leave, then stopped. Tell Crow I know what he did, and I'm not letting it slide. Tell him yourself. I will, when the time's right. Outside, they walked quickly back toward the main street. Caleb's pulse was hammering, adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. That was stupid, Eliza said. Probably. You just painted a target on both of us. The target was already there. I just made sure Crow knows I see it. They reached Rust, and Caleb helped Eliza up. As he mounted, he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. A man, thin, nervous-looking, standing in the alley beside the depot, watching them. Their eyes met for a brief second. The man glanced back toward the depot, then made a small gesture. A nod. Barely there. Then he disappeared into the shadows. Caleb filed it away. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. They rode out of town in silence. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of red and gold that would have been beautiful if Caleb had been in the mood to notice. Halfway home, Eliza spoke. What are we really doing here? What do you mean? I mean, even if we find proof, even if the judge files charges, Crow has money and lawyers and men with guns. What makes you think any of this ends well? It was a fair question. Caleb had been asking himself the same thing. I don't know if it ends well, he admitted, but I know how it ends if we do nothing. You disappear, Crow gets away with it, and the next woman he delivers to some ranch has even less chance than you did. So this is about more than just me. It was always about more than just you. Eliza was quiet for a while. Then, the shirt you gave me. Who did it belong to? Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Why does it matter? Because you kept it, and people don't keep things that don't matter. He didn't answer. Was it a woman? Yes. What happened to her? She died. The words came out flat, hard, final. Eliza didn't push further, but Caleb could feel the weight of her understanding settling between them, the recognition that they were both carrying ghosts. They reached the ranch as full dark fell. Caleb lit lamps, made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. They ate without talking much. After Eliza helped clean up, moving around the small kitchen with growing familiarity. It struck Caleb how quickly she'd adapted, how someone could go from cargo to person to something almost like partner in the span of 2 days. I'll take the porch again, he said. You can't sleep out there forever. I'll manage. Caleb. She said his name like she was testing it out, seeing how it felt. Thank you. For what? For not looking away. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Outside, the desert was alive with night sounds, insects, distant coyotes, the wind moving through scrub brush. Caleb sat on the porch steps, his rifle across his knees, and stared into the darkness. Somewhere out there, Crow was making his next move. Caleb could feel it the way you feel a storm coming, pressure in the air, a change in the wind. The question was what that move would be. He didn't have to wait long to find out. Just past midnight, Rust nickered in the corral, a warning sound. Caleb was on his feet instantly, rifle raised. A rider was approaching, single horse, moving slow and careful. Caleb stepped off the porch, putting himself between the house and whoever was coming. His finger rested on the trigger, ready. The rider emerged from the darkness into the lamplight spilling from the window. It was the man from the alley, the thin, nervous one who'd nodded at them outside the depot. He raised his hands. Don't shoot. Give me a reason not to. I have information. About Crow. Caleb didn't lower the rifle. Who are you? Name's Peter. I worked for Crow. Loading freight. Why are you here? Because what happened to that woman? Peter glanced toward the house. It's not the first time, and I'm tired of pretending I don't see it. Caleb studied him. The man was scared. You could smell it on him. But there was something else too. Shame, maybe. Or just exhaustion from carrying a weight too long. Get down, Caleb said. Slow. Peter dismounted carefully, keeping his hands visible. Up close, he looked even younger than Caleb had thought, mid-20s, with the kind of face that hadn't been hardened yet by too much living. Talk, Caleb said. Not out here. If Crow finds out I came, he's going to find out eventually. I know. That's why I'm doing this now before I lose my nerve. Peter wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool night air. Can we go inside? Caleb considered, then nodded. He kept the rifle pointed at Peter's back as they walked to the house. Inside, Eliza was standing near the table, holding a kitchen knife. She'd heard the voices. It's all right, Caleb said. He says he's here to help. You believe him? Not yet. Peter stood in the middle of the room, hands still raised, looking between them. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I can prove what Crow's been doing. I have records, shipping manifests, bills of sale, coded, but I know what they mean. Where are these records? Caleb asked. Hidden. At my boarding house. I've been copying them for months. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but... He looked at Eliza. I couldn't keep pretending it was just freight. Not after I saw them loading you into that wagon. Eliza set down the knife. You were there. I was. I'm sorry. I should have, but you didn't. No, I didn't. Peter's voice cracked. I've watched a lot of things I should have stopped. I'm not proud of it. Caleb lowered the rifle slightly. These records, they'll hold up in court? If you can get someone to authenticate them, yes. They show transactions, destinations, payments, all coded, but the pattern's clear if you know what you're looking at. And you'll testify to that? Peter swallowed hard. Yes. But if I do, I'm dead. You understand that? Crow doesn't leave loose ends. Then why are you here? Because being dead might be better than being what I've become. Peter looked at his hands like they were covered in something he couldn't wash off. I used to think I was just doing my job, just following orders. But that's what cowards tell themselves, isn't it? The room was silent for a moment. Then Eliza spoke. Where are these records now? At my room, like I said. Then we need to get them before Crow figures out you're here. He might already know. I wasn't exactly subtle leaving town. Caleb thought fast. How many people saw you leave? 3, maybe 4. Depends on if anyone was watching from the depot. Were you followed? I don't think so. I took back roads, but I'm not exactly trained in this. Caleb turned to Eliza. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. No. Her voice was firm. We go together or not at all. This isn't... Don't tell me what this isn't. I'm in this now, all the way. Caleb wanted to argue, but the look on her face stopped him. She'd made up her mind, and stubborn was apparently a permanent state for her. Fine. But you do exactly what I say. Understood? Understood. They saddled 2 horses, Rust and an older mare Caleb kept for work. Peter rode his own mount. They moved fast through the darkness, using moonlight to navigate. The ride back to town felt longer in the dark. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could be someone coming. They reached Mesquite Bend near 3 a.m. The streets were empty, most of the buildings dark. Peter led them to a boarding house on the edge of town, a sagging 2-story structure that looked one strong wind away from collapse. Rooms upstairs, Peter whispered. Second door on the left. They tied the horses out back and slipped inside through a rear entrance. The stairs creaked loud enough to wake the dead, but no one stirred. Peter's room was sparse. A bed, a trunk, a small table with a lamp. He went straight to the trunk, pulled out a false bottom, and retrieved a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Here, he said, handing it to Caleb. Caleb unwrapped it carefully. Inside were ledgers, loose papers, manifests, columns of numbers and coded entries. It would take time to make sense of it all, but even at a glance, the volume was damning. "This is good," Caleb said. "This is—" A sound from downstairs, footsteps. They all froze. More footsteps. Multiple people, moving slow, deliberate. Peter's face went white. "They found me." Caleb moved to the window, looked out. 3 horses tied out front, men standing near them. Crow's men. "Back door," Caleb whispered. They moved fast but quiet, retracing their steps. Down the stairs toward the rear exit. They were almost there when a voice called out, "Peter, I know you're in here." The voice was smooth, calm, almost friendly. Caleb knew that voice. He'd heard it years ago, making promises it never intended to keep. Silas Crow. Peter stopped moving. His whole body was shaking. "Keep going," Caleb whispered. "He'll kill me." "Not if we move now." But it was too late. A figure appeared at the end of the hallway, blocking the back door. Tall, well-dressed, carrying himself like a man who'd never had to fight for anything because he paid others to do it for him. Crow smiled when he saw Caleb. "Well, been a long time, Thorn." Caleb's hand moved to his gun. "I wouldn't," Crow said. 2 more men emerged from the shadows behind him, both armed. "You might get me, but my friends here will get you, and the girl, and poor Peter here, who's made such unfortunate choices." Caleb's mind raced, calculating odds, looking for exits. "Nothing to say?" Crow continued. "That's unlike you. You used to be so full of righteous anger." "What do you want, Crow?" "What I've always wanted. Order, control. Things in their proper place." He looked at Eliza. "And you, my dear, are not in your proper place." "I'm exactly where I choose to be," Eliza said. Crow's smile widened. "Choice. Such a pretty word. But let's be honest, choice is a luxury for people with options. You don't have options. You have a contract. A forged contract." "Is it? Strange. The ledger says otherwise." "The ledger's a lie. Perhaps. But it's a legal lie, which makes it truth in the eyes of the law." Caleb stepped forward slightly. "Let them go. This is between you and me." "Oh, Thorn. You still think this is personal?" Crow shook his head. "It's business. It's always been business. You're just a man who can't accept that some commodities have 2 legs and a heartbeat." "She's not a commodity." "She is, if the paperwork says she is." The casual cruelty in Crow's voice was worse than anger would have been. This wasn't a man who hated. This was a man who didn't feel anything at all. "The records Peter took," Crow said, "I'd like them back." "Not a chance." "Then I suppose we have a problem." The hallway seemed to shrink. The armed men moved closer. Caleb's hand hovered over his gun, but Crow was right. He might get 1 shot, maybe 2. Not enough. Then Eliza did something that surprised everyone. She stepped forward, putting herself between Caleb and Crow. "You want your property back?" she said. "Fine. I'll go with you. Just let them live." "Eliza, no," Caleb started. She didn't look at him, kept her eyes on Crow. "That's what this is about, isn't it? Your investment, your reputation. Let me go quietly, and you get both." Crow studied her. "Interesting. You think you're worth their lives?" "I think you're a businessman, and killing a rancher and a clerk creates problems. Witnesses, questions. But if I come willingly—" She spread her hands. "Everyone walks away. Except you. Except me." Caleb grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" She finally looked at him. "What I have to." "The hell you are. It's my choice, Caleb. Remember? You said I get to choose." "Not this, not—" Crow interrupted. "Touching, really. But I'm afraid her offer, while appreciated, isn't quite enough." He nodded to his men. They raised their guns. And Caleb knew, in that frozen moment, that they were all about to die in a cheap boarding house hallway, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Then Peter moved. He lunged at Crow, not with any grace or skill, just desperate momentum. Caught Crow off guard, knocked him sideways. "Run!" Peter shouted. Caleb didn't think. He grabbed Eliza, shoved her toward the back door, grabbed the bundle of records. Gunshots exploded in the confined space, deafening, disorienting. They burst through the back door into the night. Behind them, more shots, shouting. The horses were there. They mounted fast, Eliza scrambling up behind Caleb. "Peter," she started. "He's gone," Caleb said. Move. They kicked the horses into a gallop, tearing through the dark streets. More gunshots behind them, but distance was on their side now. They rode hard for 20 minutes before Caleb slowed, listening. No pursuit. Not yet. Eliza was crying against his back. Silent, but he could feel it. "I'm sorry," he said. She didn't answer. They rode on through the desert, the bundle of records pressed between them, bought with a man's life. And somewhere behind them, Silas Crow was learning what Caleb already knew, that when you push people far enough, they stop running. They start fighting back. They didn't stop until the ranch came into view with the first gray light of dawn. The horses were lathered, breathing hard, and Caleb's shirt was soaked through with sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature. Eliza hadn't said a word the entire ride back, just held onto him with a grip that left marks on his ribs. When they dismounted, she finally let go and stumbled toward the house. Caleb caught her arm. "You need to... Don't." Her voice was raw. "Don't tell me what I need." She pulled away and disappeared inside. The door didn't slam. That would have been easier somehow. Instead, it just closed with a soft click that felt worse than any amount of anger. Caleb stood there for a moment, the bundle of records still clutched in his other hand. Peter's blood had probably dried on these papers by now. A man he barely knew had thrown himself at armed men so they could escape with evidence that might not even matter. He looked down at the oilcloth wrapping. His hands were shaking. Inside, he found Eliza sitting at the table, staring at nothing. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. Caleb set the records down carefully, then pulled out the other chair. The scrape of wood on wood seemed too loud. "He didn't hesitate," Eliza said quietly. "No. He just moved, like it was the only thing left to do." "Sometimes it is. Is that supposed to make it better?" Caleb didn't have an answer for that. He'd seen enough men die to know that meaning didn't make death weigh any less. "I told him to come with us," Eliza continued. "When we were planning to get the records, I said he should leave town, disappear somewhere Crow couldn't find him. He just looked at me and said, 'Running doesn't fix what's broken inside.'" She finally looked at Caleb. "What did he mean by that?" "He meant guilt isn't something you can outrun." So he traded his life for records, for paper. He traded his life so the next person wouldn't have to. Caleb stood, moved to the window. The sun was coming up proper now, painting the desert in colors that felt wrong given what they'd just survived. "That's not nothing. It feels like nothing." "I know." They sat in silence for a while. Caleb made coffee eventually, more for something to do than because either of them wanted it. Eliza drank hers black, not seeming to taste it. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Caleb had been asking himself the same question since they'd fled that boarding house. "We take these records to Judge Farrow, show him what Peter died getting us. And if it's not enough, then we find something else." "There isn't anything else, Caleb. Crow controls the freight companies, the shipping manifests, probably half the officials between here and Tucson. We have stolen records from a dead man and testimony from a woman nobody believes. That's not a case. That's a funeral waiting to happen." She wasn't wrong. The smart move, the survivable move, would be to burn the records, put Eliza on the next stage heading east, and try to disappear before Crow's reach extended this far. But Caleb had tried smart before. It hadn't saved anyone. "There's one thing Crow doesn't control," he said. "What's that?" "Marriage law." Eliza looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "What?" "You said they claimed you were property, cargo, something purchased." Caleb turned from the window to face her. "But property can't get married. Only people can." "I don't understand. If you're my wife, legally, on paper, then you can't be his property. The law doesn't allow ownership of spouses. It's one of the few protections that actually means something." Eliza stood slowly. "You're suggesting we get married. Actually married." "I'm suggesting we use the one legal tool Crow can't corrupt. A marriage certificate filed with the territory carries more weight than any bill of sale. It supersedes ownership claims." "That's insane." "Maybe. But it's also the only play we have left." "Caleb, this isn't..." She stopped, trying to organize her thoughts. "You're talking about binding yourself legally to a stranger because of a problem that isn't even yours. It became mine the moment they left you at my fence." "No. It became yours when you decided not to look away. There's a difference." Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. And marriage isn't just paperwork. It means things, obligations, ties that don't just dissolve when the danger passes. We can figure that out later. Can we? Because from where I'm standing, you're a man who lives alone in the middle of nowhere specifically to avoid ties. And I'm a woman who's been property so long I barely remember what it feels like to make my own choices. Neither of us is ready for what you're suggesting. Caleb moved closer but didn't touch her. You asked what happens now. This is what happens. We go to Tucson. It's far enough from Crow's immediate reach that we might make it without getting shot. We file the marriage certificate at the territorial office. We present the records to someone who outranks the local judge. And we make enough noise that Crow can't make us disappear quietly. That's not a plan. That's hope dressed up as action. You have a better idea? She didn't answer right away. Caleb could see her working through it, weighing survival against principle, fear against the kind of anger that had been building since that wagon rolled onto his property. If we do this, she finally said, I need you to understand something. I'm not trading one form of ownership for another. I'm not going from Crow's property to your wife if wife means the same thing. It doesn't. How do I know that? Because when this is over, when Crow's dealt with, and the law's on your side, I'll give you annulment papers. Signed, witnessed, no argument. Caleb held her gaze. This is a shield, Eliza, not a cage. She studied him for a long moment. You really mean that? I do. Why? What's in this for you besides trouble? That was harder to answer. Caleb thought about the shirt he'd given her, the one that belonged to someone who'd died because he hadn't been fast enough or smart enough or brave enough. He thought about all the times he'd chosen safe over right and spent years trying to forget what that cost. Maybe I'm tired of living small, he said. Eliza's expression softened slightly. Not agreement exactly, but something close to understanding. When do we leave? She asked. Soon as the horses rest. Few hours. And if Crow comes here first? Caleb looked at the rifle leaning against the wall. Then we'll handle it. They spent the morning preparing. Caleb cleaned his weapons, packed supplies, wrote out a basic will leaving his property to no one in particular, just in case. Eliza watched him work, then asked if he had paper. Why? Because if we're doing this, I need to write something down, something true, in case I don't get another chance. He found her paper and a pencil. She sat at the table and wrote for 20 minutes, her hand moving quick and certain. When she finished, she folded the pages and tucked them into her shirt. What'd you write? Caleb asked. The truth, my version of it anyway, who I was before, what happened, why I'm choosing this. She looked at him. If something happens to me, make sure someone reads it. Make sure they know I wasn't just cargo. Nothing's going to happen to you. You can't promise that. No, but I can try. Around noon, they saddled fresh horses. Caleb strapped the bundle of records to his saddle, along with a rifle and enough ammunition to fight a small war. Probably wouldn't be enough if it came to that, but it was something. They were about to mount when Eliza stopped. Wait. What? She went back into the house, emerged a minute later carrying something wrapped in cloth. When she unwrapped it, Caleb saw it was the rope they'd cut off her wrist that first morning. She'd kept it. Why? He started. Evidence, she said. Physical proof of what was done to me. The rope. The marks. She held out her wrists, showing the still healing wounds. I want a doctor to document this before we go to Tucson. Someone who'll testify about what these injuries indicate. Mesquite Bend only has one doctor. Then we go to him. Eliza, Crow's people might still be in town. After what happened, I know the risk. But if we're building a case, we need everything. Testimony, records, physical evidence, all of it. Her jaw set in that stubborn line Caleb was starting to recognize. I'm not going into this halfway. She was right. He hated that she was right, but she was. There's a doctor in Copper Springs, he said. Smaller town about 15 miles west. Less chance of running into Crow's men. Then that's where we go first. They rode out, keeping to less traveled paths. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Red rock formations rising from scrubland, mesas in the distance, sky so blue it hurt to look at. This was the Arizona Caleb had chosen specifically for its emptiness. Now he was filling it with exactly the kind of complications he'd spent years avoiding. Copper Springs was barely a town. more like a cluster of buildings that had sprouted around a reliable water source. The doctor's office was attached to his house, a hand-painted sign out front reading Dr. Marcus Webb, physician. They tied the horses and went inside. A bell above the door announced them. Dr. Webb appeared from a back room, 50-ish, with kind eyes behind thick spectacles. He took one look at Eliza's bruised face and rope-burned wrists, and his expression shifted to professional concern. "What happened?" "I need you to examine her injuries," Caleb said, "and document what you find." "Document for what purpose?" "Legal testimony, possible court case." Webb looked between them. "You're in some kind of trouble." "The kind that requires proof," Eliza said. "Can you help?" The doctor considered for a moment, then nodded. "Come with me, miss." "Sir, you can wait here." Eliza followed him into the examination room. Caleb paced the small waiting area, listening to the muffled conversation beyond the door. 20 minutes passed, then 30. When they finally emerged, Webb was writing something in a ledger. Eliza looked tired but steady. "Well?" Caleb asked. Webb finished writing, then looked up. "The injuries are consistent with prolonged restraint. Rope burns on both wrists and ankles, some infected. Bruising across the torso suggesting rough handling or impact. Malnutrition indicating inadequate food and water over several days." He closed the ledger. "I've documented everything. If you need written testimony, I can provide it." "We'll need it," Caleb said. "Official, signed, and dated." "That'll take a day or two to prepare properly." "We don't have a day or two." Webb frowned. "I can have something basic ready by this evening, but if you need it to hold up in court—" "This evening works," Eliza interrupted. "We'll come back for it." They left with Webb's promise that he'd have the documentation ready by sundown. Outside, the day had turned hot and still. Caleb helped Eliza onto her horse. "You all right?" he asked. He was gentle, more than I expected. She settled into the saddle. "Are we going to Tucson now?" "Not yet. One more stop first." "Where?" "There's a priest in Copper Springs, Father Domingo. If we're going to do this marriage thing, we need him to witness it." Eliza looked at him. "You want to get married now, before we even reach Tucson?" "The certificate needs to be filed in Tucson, but the marriage itself can happen anywhere with proper witness. Having the priest's signature will make it harder for Crow to claim fraud." "You've thought this through." "Some." "And you're sure?" Caleb met her eyes. "I'm sure that if we wait, Crow might not give us the chance. I'm sure that every hour we delay is an hour he's planning. And I'm sure that the only legal weapon we have is the one he can't buy or threaten away." He paused. "But if you're not sure—" "I didn't say that." Eliza straightened in her saddle. "Let's go find your priest." Father Domingo lived in a small adobe church at the edge of town. He was ancient, at least 70, with sun-weathered skin and hands that trembled slightly when he moved. But his eyes were sharp, and he listened without interrupting as Caleb explained what they needed. "You want me to marry you?" Domingo said when Caleb finished. "Right now, without banns or preparation." "Yes." "Why?" "Because a woman's life depends on it." Domingo looked at Eliza. "Is this true, child?" "It's true, Father." "And you consent to this marriage, of your own free will?" "I do." "This man has not coerced you?" "No. If anything, I'm the one insisting we do this right." Domingo was quiet for a moment, studying them both. "I've been a priest for 40 years. I've married hundreds of couples. Some for love, some for convenience, some for reasons I never fully understood. But I've never married two people who looked quite so much like they were preparing for battle." "That's because we are," Caleb said. "And marriage is your weapon? It's our shield. There's a difference?" "I hope so." Domingo smiled faintly. "Honest, at least." He stood slowly, joints creaking. "I'll do it. But you'll stand before me and speak the vows proper. No shortcuts, no hedging. If you're going to use the sanctity of marriage as protection, you'll honor what it means." "Fair enough," Caleb said. They stood in the small chapel, dust motes floating in the light coming through the single window. Domingo pulled out a worn prayer book and opened it to a marked page. "Caleb Thorne, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Caleb looked at Eliza, This woman he'd known for less than a week, who'd been delivered to his doorstep like cargo and refused to stay broken. I do. Eliza. Domingo paused. I don't know your family name, child. I don't have one anymore. Just Eliza. Then just Eliza, you shall be in the records. Domingo turned to her. Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Eliza's voice was steady. I do. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. Domingo closed the book. May whatever you're fighting for be worth what you're risking. It is, Eliza said softly. Domingo signed the marriage certificate with careful precision, then handed it to Caleb. File this properly. It only has power if it's official. We will. Thank you, Father. Outside they stood by the horses, the certificate folded in Caleb's pocket. The sun was heading toward late afternoon. So, Eliza said, we're married. We are. Feels strange. Yeah. You think it'll work? As protection, I mean. I think it's better than nothing, she almost smiled. High praise. They rode back to Dr. Webb's office as promised. He had the documentation ready. 3 pages detailing Eliza's injuries with clinical precision. He'd even included sketches of the rope burn patterns. This should hold up, Webb said, handing over the papers. But I'll be honest with you. If this goes to trial, you'll want a more thorough examination. Photos, if possible, maybe testimony from other doctors. If it goes to trial, we'll have won already, Caleb said. How do you figure? Because Crow doesn't let things go to trial. He makes problems disappear before they get that far. Webb's expression darkened. You're talking about Silas Crow? You know him? I've treated men who work for him, fixed injuries that looked a lot like the ones your wife has. He glanced at Eliza. Be careful. That man doesn't lose. Everyone loses eventually, Caleb said. They left Copper Springs as the sun began its descent. The ride to Tucson would take the better part of 2 days if they pushed hard. Caleb wanted to make as much distance as possible before they stopped for the night. They rode in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Eliza spoke. Your wife. What? Dr. Webb called me your wife. It's the first time anyone's called me that. She paused. It's strange hearing it. You get used to it. Have you? Been married before, I mean. Caleb kept his eyes on the horizon. No. Almost? Once. Didn't work out. The woman whose shirt I'm wearing? He didn't answer. I'm sorry, Eliza said. I shouldn't have asked. It's fine. Just old history. History has a way of not staying old. She was right about that too. Caleb had spent 3 years trying to bury the past, and here it was, riding alongside him in the form of Silas Crow and choices he couldn't unmake. They made camp near a dried creek bed as darkness fell. No fire. Too risky. They ate cold beans from a tin and shared water from Caleb's canteen. Tell me about Crow, Eliza said. Not what he is now. What he was when you knew him. Caleb leaned back against a rock, looking at the stars emerging overhead. He was a freight operator, still is technically. But even back then, everyone knew what he really moved. People, mostly women and children, some willing, most not. He'd dress it up in paperwork, make it look legal, indenture contracts, service agreements, bills of sale disguised as employment. How'd you get involved? I was younger, stupider. Thought I could make a difference. Caleb's voice was flat, reciting facts. There was a woman, the one whose shirt you're wearing. She worked for a reform organization, tried to help people escape situations like yours. When we found out Crow was behind most of the trafficking in the territory, we decided to stop him. What happened? We gathered evidence, built a case, got it all the way to a federal prosecutor. He paused. Crow found out. Came after everyone involved. Some he bought off, some he threatened, and some he killed. Yeah, including her. Caleb nodded slowly. They made it look like an accident, wagon crash on a mountain road, but I knew. We all knew. And you couldn't prove it. No. Same problem we have now. Not enough evidence, not enough people willing to testify. Crow walked away clean, and the case fell apart. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Is that why you came out here? To get away from it? Partly. Mostly I just wanted to stop failing people. You're not failing me. Not yet. Caleb. She waited until he looked at her. Whatever happens in Tucson, whatever Crow does next, I chose this. You gave me options when I didn't have any. That matters. Does it? It's the only thing that matters. They settled in for the night, taking turns keeping watch. Caleb took first shift, sitting with his rifle across his knees, listening to the desert sounds. Eliza slept fitfully, jerking awake every hour or so before exhaustion dragged her back under. Near midnight, during Eliza's watch, Caleb woke to find her staring at the marriage certificate by moonlight. Can't sleep? He asked. Can't stop thinking. She folded the paper carefully. This is real now. Legal. Binding. You having second thoughts? No, just first thoughts that won't stop repeating. She looked at him. What happens after, when this is done? What do you mean? I mean, you promised annulment papers, freedom. But what does that look like for someone like me? Where do I go? What do I do? I've been property for so long, I don't remember how to be anything else. Caleb sat up. You're already something else. You proved that when you stood up to Crow in that hallway, when you decided to fight instead of just survive. That was adrenaline and fear. That's not a life. Then we'll figure out what is, one piece at a time. You say that like you're planning to be there. Maybe I am. Eliza looked at him for a long moment. Don't make promises you can't keep, Caleb. I've had enough of those. I'm not promising anything except tomorrow. That good enough? She considered, then nodded. For now. The next day brought heat that shimmered off the rocks like water. They rode hard, stopping only to water the horses and catch their breath. By late afternoon, Tucson appeared on the horizon. A real town, bigger than Mesquite Bend, with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent. We need a plan, Eliza said as they approached. File the marriage certificate first, get it official, then find the federal marshal's office and present Peter's records. Just like that? Just like that. Crow will have people here, probably already knows we're coming. Probably. And we're just going to walk in anyway. You have a better idea? Eliza didn't. They rode into Tucson side by side, drawing looks from people on the street. Two trail-worn riders with dust in their hair and determination in their eyes. The territorial office was a square building near the center of town. Inside, a bored clerk sat behind a desk, stamping papers. Help you? He asked without looking up. Need to file a marriage certificate, Caleb said. That got the clerk's attention. He looked at them properly, taking in their disheveled appearance. You two just get hitched? Yesterday, in Copper Springs. Bit off the beaten path for a wedding. It was convenient. The clerk shrugged and pulled out a ledger. Names? Caleb Thorne and Eliza Thorne, the clerk wrote carefully. Witnesses? Father Domingo of Copper Springs. Date of ceremony? Caleb gave it, and the clerk recorded everything with slow precision. When he finished, he stamped the certificate and added it to a stack of documents. That's it? Eliza asked. That's it. You're officially married in the eyes of the territory. Congratulations. They walked out into the street. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. One down, Caleb said. Now the hard part, Eliza replied. The federal marshal's office was 3 blocks over. They found it just as the marshal was locking up for the day, a thick-built man with gray hair and a badge that had seen better days. We're closed, he said. This can't wait, Caleb said. It always can't wait. The marshal looked them over. What's the problem? Human trafficking, fraud, murder. Caleb pulled out Peter's bundle of records. And evidence to prove it. That changed things. The marshal unlocked the door and ushered them inside. His office was cramped but organized. He cleared a space on his desk and gestured for them to sit. Start from the beginning, he said, and don't leave anything out. So they told him. Everything. The wagon. The forged signature. The confrontation with Crow. Peter's death. The marriage certificate as legal protection. All of it. The marshal listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he reached for Peter's records and began going through them page by page. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Finally, he looked up. This is good, he said. Better than good. If even half of what's coded here checks out, we've got enough to bring federal charges. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. So you'll act? I'll investigate. That's what I can promise. Full investigation, proper procedure, by the book. The marshal tapped the records. But you need to understand, Crow's got resources. He'll fight this with everything he has. Lawyers, judges, politicians on his payroll. This won't be quick or easy. We don't need easy, Eliza said. We need possible. Possible I can do. The marshal pulled out a clean sheet of paper. I'll need official statements from both of you, detailed. Every interaction with Crow, every piece of evidence, every witness we might call. They spent the next 2 hours writing out their statements. Caleb's hand cramped from holding the pen, but he kept going, documenting everything he could remember. When they finally finished, the marshal collected the papers and locked them in his safe along with Peter's records. You two need to stay in town, he said. Find a hotel. Keep your heads down. Don't do anything that might give Crow ammunition to claim you're trying to flee jurisdiction. How long? Caleb asked. Few days at minimum, maybe a week. I need to verify these records, interview witnesses, build a case strong enough that even Crow's lawyers can't tear it apart. They left the marshal's office as full dark settled over Tucson. The streets were quieter now, most businesses closed for the night. We need a place to stay, Caleb said, and food, and probably about 12 hours of sleep. They found a small hotel on a side street, nothing fancy, but clean enough. Caleb paid for one room with 2 beds. The clerk gave them a knowing look that Caleb ignored. Upstairs, the room was basic but functional. 2 narrow beds, a wash basin, a window overlooking the street. Eliza sat on one of the beds and immediately lay back, staring at the ceiling. We did it. Did what? Got the evidence to someone who might actually use it, filed the marriage certificate, survived another day. She turned her head to look at him. That's not nothing. It's not everything either. No, but it's enough for tonight. Caleb went to the window, looking out at the dark street below. Somewhere in this town, Crow was making his next move. Caleb could feel it like a storm building on the horizon. But for now, they were alive. They were legal. And they had a chance. Sometimes that was all you could ask for. They woke to pounding on the door. Caleb was on his feet before he was fully conscious, gun in hand, heart hammering. Eliza sat bolt upright in the other bed, eyes wide. Marshal's office, a voice called from the hallway. Open up. Caleb moved to the door, keeping the gun ready. Identify yourself. Deputy Marshal Carson got a message from Marshal Hendricks, says it's urgent. Caleb cracked the door, keeping the chain latched. A young man in a deputy's badge stood there, looking nervous. What message? Marshal says you need to come to the courthouse. Right now. Says there's been a development. What kind of development? He didn't say. Just said to get you there quick. Caleb looked back at Eliza. She was already pulling on her boots. Give us 5 minutes, Caleb said. They dressed fast, checked their weapons, and followed the deputy through the early morning streets. The sun wasn't up yet, just a gray pre-dawn light that made everything look washed out and unreal. The courthouse was lit up inside despite the hour. Marshal Hendricks stood in the main hall, talking to 3 other men in suits. He looked up when Caleb and Eliza entered, his expression grim. We have a problem, he said. What kind? Hendricks dismissed the deputy with a nod, then gestured for Caleb and Eliza to follow him into a side office. He closed the door firmly. Crow filed an injunction last night, federal level. Claims you kidnapped his property and are using fraudulent documents to evade prosecution. Caleb felt his stomach drop. That's horseshit. I know it is. You know it is. But he's got a judge in Santa Fe who signed off on it. Hendricks pulled out a telegram, handed it to Caleb. Arrest warrant. For both of you. Kidnapping, fraud, interfering with lawful commerce. Eliza read over Caleb's shoulder. This can't be legal. It is if the judge says it is. And Judge Morrison is known for being sympathetic to business interests. Hendricks rubbed his face, looking exhausted. I've sent word to the territorial governor, but that'll take days to sort out. Meanwhile, I've got deputies from Santa Fe arriving this afternoon with orders to take you into custody. So arrest us, Caleb said. At least we'll be in your custody instead of theirs. Doesn't work that way. The warrant's federal. It supersedes my authority. I have to hand you over. Then we're dead, Eliza said quietly. You understand that? The moment those deputies get us out of town, we'll have an accident, just like all of Crow's other problems. Hendricks didn't deny it. I'm working on it. I've got people looking into Morrison's connection to Crow, trying to find grounds to challenge the warrant. But I need time. How much time? More than we have. Caleb looked at Eliza. She looked back at him, and he saw in her eyes what he was thinking. They'd come this far, fought this hard, and now the system they'd trusted was being used against them. What if we leave? Eliza asked. Just ride out before the deputies arrive? Then you're fugitives, Hendricks said, and every lawman in the territory will be looking for you. Crow will make sure of it. As opposed to staying here and getting arrested on false charges? At least if you're in custody, you're alive. You can fight the charges in court. Crow's court, Caleb said. With Crow's judge. How's that going to end? Hendricks didn't have an answer. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on all of them. Then Eliza spoke. What about the marriage certificate? Hendricks frowned. What about it? Crow's claiming I'm his property, but I'm legally married now, filed and official. Doesn't that invalidate his claim? In a rational court, yes. But Morrison isn't running a rational court. He's running whatever court Crow paid for. Hendricks paused. Although... What? Caleb asked. There's a territorial law, old one, not used much, that protects married women from being claimed as chattel or debt settlement. It was written to prevent husbands from gambling away their wives, but the language is broad enough that it might apply here. Might? Would depend on how it's argued, and who's arguing it. Hendricks thought for a moment. There's a lawyer in town, Miranda Ashford. She's made a name challenging property law cases. If anyone could use that statute to buy you time, it's her. Can we trust her? Eliza asked. Can you trust anyone right now? Hendricks shot back. But she's good, she's honest, and she hates men like Crow. That's the best you're going to get. Caleb looked at Eliza. Your call. She didn't hesitate. Let's find her. Miranda Ashford's office was above a dry goods store, accessible by an outside staircase that creaked ominously. They knocked, and after a moment the door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers. Marshal Hendricks sent us, Caleb said. He telegraphed ahead. Come in. The office was small but packed with books and papers. Legal texts lined every wall and documents covered every surface. Ashford cleared 2 chairs and gestured for them to sit. I know why you're here, she said, settling behind her desk. And I know what you're up against. Silas Crow and a complicit judge, not an easy fight. Can you help us? Eliza asked. That depends. Tell me everything about this marriage. When, where, under what circumstances? They laid it out. The ceremony with Father Domingo, the certificate filed in Tucson, the timing relative to Crow's claims. Ashford listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair. The territorial statute Hendricks mentioned, Section 47 of the Property and Marriage Code, it's designed to prevent exactly what Crow's attempting. A married woman cannot be claimed as property, seized for debt, or transferred as chattel. So we have a defense, Caleb said. You have an argument. Whether it's a defense depends on how Morrison chooses to interpret the law. Ashford tapped her pen against her desk. Here's what he'll claim, that your marriage is fraudulent, entered into solely to evade a legitimate ownership claim. He'll say it's a sham designed to circumvent legal contracts. It's not a sham, Eliza said. I believe you, but can you prove it? Ashford looked at them both. In court, under oath, with Crow's lawyers trying to tear apart every word you say, can you prove that this marriage is genuine? The question hung in the air. Caleb thought about vows spoken in a dusty chapel, about a piece of paper that was supposed to be a shield, but felt more like a target now. The marriage is legal, he said, filed properly, witnessed by a priest. That should be enough. In a fair system it would be, but Crow doesn't play in fair systems. He plays in systems he's corrupted. Ashford stood, pulling a book from the shelf. However, there is one thing that might work in our favor. If I can get the case transferred from Morrison's court to a territorial court here in Tucson, we'd have a fighting chance. How do you do that? By arguing that the marriage certificate was filed here, making this the proper jurisdiction. It's a long shot, but I've won on thinner arguments. What do you need from us? Eliza asked. Time and truth. I need to file motions, challenge the warrant, request the transfer. And I need you both to stay visible and available. No running, no hiding. The moment you look like fugitives, we lose any moral authority we have. The deputies from Santa Fe arrived this afternoon, Caleb said. We don't have time. Then I'd better work fast. Ashford was already reaching for paper, writing rapidly. Go back to your hotel. Stay there. Don't speak to anyone without me present. And whatever you do, don't give Crow's people any excuse to claim you're fleeing. They left her office with more questions than answers. The sun was fully up now, Tucson waking around them. People going about their normal lives, completely unaware that in a courthouse across town, their fate was being decided by lawyers and laws that felt increasingly like fiction. Back at the hotel, they paced the small room like caged animals. Eliza stood at the window, watching the street. Caleb cleaned his gun for the third time, needing something to do with his hands. This is wrong, Eliza said suddenly. What is? Hiding, waiting, letting other people decide whether we live or die. She turned from the window. We should be out there doing something. Doing what? We've given the marshal our evidence. We've hired a lawyer. We've played by every rule they have. And it's not enough. It's never enough with men like Crow. Her voice rose. He's out there right now, probably having breakfast, confident that by tonight we'll be in chains or dead, and we're just sitting here hoping the system works. You have a better idea? I have anger. That's not the same thing, but it's what I've got. She crossed the room, stood directly in front of him. Tell me the truth. Do you really think Ashford can win this? Caleb wanted to lie, wanted to give her hope, but she deserved better than that. I think she'll try. I think there's a chance, but no, I don't think it's likely. So what do? We trust the process a little longer, and if it fails, we run. We leave everything behind and disappear so deep Crow never finds us. You'd do that? Just vanish? Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've already vanished once, from a life I barely remember. What's one more disappearance? Before Caleb could respond, there was a knock at the door. They both froze. It's Ashford, a woman's voice called. Caleb opened the door. The lawyer stood there with an armful of papers, looking simultaneously energized and exhausted. I filed the motion for jurisdictional transfer, she said, entering without waiting for invitation. Judge here in Tucson, Judge Farrow actually, has agreed to hear arguments this afternoon. Farrow? Caleb remembered the man from their earlier visit. He seemed sympathetic, but he also seemed scared of Crow. He's cautious, not scared. There's a difference. Ashford spread papers across the bed. Here's what's going to happen. At 2 o'clock, we go before Farrow and argue that this case belongs in territorial court, not Morrison's federal court. Crow's lawyers will fight it. It'll get ugly. And if Farrow rules against us, then you're on a stage to Santa Fe by evening. And if he rules for us, then we buy time, maybe enough to actually build a real defense. Eliza picked up one of the papers, scanning it. This motion, you're arguing that I'm a person, not property. That seems obvious. It should be. But in practice, it's the entire fight. If Morrison's warrant treats you as merchandise that was stolen, then you're not protected by marriage law. But if Farrow rules that you're a person who entered into a legal marriage, then Crow's claim collapses. Ashford looked at her directly. That's why your testimony is crucial. You'll need to explain clearly, convincingly, that you're not cargo, that you have agency, that this marriage was your choice. It was. Then you need to make the court believe it. They spent the next hours preparing. Ashford drilled them on questions she expected Crow's lawyers to ask, teaching them how to answer without giving openings for attack. She was relentless, pushing them harder each time they wavered or sounded uncertain. You need to understand something, she said during a brief break. Crow's entire strategy depends on dehumanizing you, Eliza. If he can convince the court you're just property that changed hands improperly, he wins. But if you stand up there and speak as a full person with rights and choices, he loses his foundation. No pressure, Eliza muttered. No. Lots of pressure. That's the reality. Ashford's tone softened slightly. But I've seen people testify under worse conditions. You're stronger than you think. How do you know? Because you're still here, still fighting. Most people would have broken by now. At 1:30, they walked to the courthouse together. Ashford in front, Caleb and Eliza flanking her, all of them trying to project confidence they didn't entirely feel. The courtroom was already half full. Caleb recognized Marshal Hendricks sitting near the front, a few townspeople, probably drawn by gossip. And at the prosecutor's table sat two men in expensive suits who could only be Crow's lawyers. Silas Crow himself sat in the front row of the gallery, looking relaxed and amused. When his eyes met Caleb's, he smiled. Judge Farrow entered from his chambers. Everyone stood. "Be seated," Farrow said, settling behind the bench. "We're here to hear arguments on jurisdictional transfer in the matter of Territory versus Thorne. Miss Ashford, you filed the motion?" "I did, Your Honor." "Then proceed." Ashford stood, and for the next 20 minutes she laid out her argument with precision. The marriage certificate filed in Tucson, the territorial statute protecting married women, the impropriety of Morrison's warrant, which treated a person as property. Her voice was clear, her logic sharp, and Caleb found himself believing they might actually have a chance. Then Crow's lead lawyer stood. His name was Dalton Hayes, and he looked like what money could buy. Perfectly tailored suit, confident bearing, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. "Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to use a technicality to evade justice. The facts are simple. Mr. Crow entered into a legal business transaction. Payment was made. Delivery was arranged. And then Mr. Thorne interfered with that transaction, taking possession of property that didn't belong to him. The property in question is a human being," Ashford interrupted. "Counsel will not interrupt," Farrow said mildly. Hayes continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Furthermore, the marriage certificate Miss Ashford relies on was clearly entered into fraudulently." "Objection," Ashford said, standing again. "There's no evidence of fraud." "The timing speaks for itself," Hayes shot back. "Mr. Thorne and Miss—" He paused deliberately. "The woman in question were strangers days ago. They married immediately upon arriving in Tucson, right before charges were filed. That's not a marriage. That's an escape plan." "It's a legal marriage," Ashford insisted. "Properly witnessed, properly filed. By a priest who's never met either party, in a town 40 miles from here, without banns or proper waiting period." Hayes turned to Farrow. "Your Honor, if we allow this kind of manipulation, every criminal in the territory will simply marry their way out of consequences." Farrow held up a hand. "I've heard enough argument on this point. The question is whether this court has jurisdiction, not whether the marriage is valid." "The two questions are linked, Your Honor," Hayes said. "If the marriage is fraudulent, then it cannot serve as basis for jurisdictional transfer." "The marriage is not on trial here," Ashford countered. "What's on trial is whether a woman can be claimed as property in defiance of territorial law." "What's on trial," Hayes said, his voice rising slightly, "is whether contracts mean anything, whether business transactions have any protection under law. My client entered into a legitimate agreement to buy a human being," Ashford cut in, "to provide employment by force—" "Enough," Farrow said louder now. "Both of you, sit down." They sat. The courtroom went silent. Farrow was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Caleb could see him working through it, weighing law against pressure, principle against practicality. Finally, he spoke. "This court recognizes that serious questions have been raised about the nature of the original transaction, questions that deserve full examination. However, jurisdiction for such examination is not entirely clear." He paused. "I'm going to split this decision. The jurisdictional transfer is granted for the property law aspects, specifically whether Mrs. Thorne can be claimed as chattel. However, the fraud and kidnapping charges will remain under federal purview pending further investigation." "Your Honor," Hayes started, "my ruling stands. Mrs. Thorne will remain in Tucson under this court's jurisdiction. Mr. Thorne as well, given his connection to the case. However, both will be required to post bond and remain available for federal proceedings." "What amount for bond?" Ashford asked. $500 each. Caleb's heart sank. He didn't have that kind of money, not close. Hayes was already moving. "Your Honor, given the flight risk—" "The bond stands," Farrow said firmly. "If they can post it, they remain free pending trial. If not, they'll be held in territorial custody, not federal, until the matter is resolved." He stood. "This hearing is adjourned." Outside the courtroom, Ashford pulled them aside. "That was better than I expected," she said. "Better?" Caleb stared at her. "We need $1,000 by tonight, or we go to jail. But territorial jail, not federal custody. And we've established that Eliza is a person, not property, in the eyes of this court. That's significant. Not if we can't make bond. Do you have any assets? Property you can leverage? A ranch that's probably worth 300 if I'm lucky, and it's 40 miles from here. Ashford thought. What about friends, family? No. Anyone who might vouch for you? Caleb looked at Eliza, who shook her head. They were alone in this, the way they'd been alone from the start. Let me ask around, Ashford said. Sometimes merchants will front bond if they think you're good for it. Why would they think that? Because I'll tell them you are. Give me until this evening. She left them standing on the courthouse steps. The sun was past its peak, shadows growing long. Caleb felt the weight of the last few days pressing down. The violence, the running, the constant state of fear disguised as action. We could run now, Eliza said quietly, before they process the bond requirement. Just take the horses and go. And prove Hayes right? That this was all an escape plan? What if it was? What if that's exactly what we should have done from the beginning? Caleb turned to face her. You don't mean that. Don't I? Look at where doing things the right way got us. We followed the law, we filed papers, we got lawyers, and we're still about to end up in jail. Maybe the system isn't worth trusting. If we run, we lose any chance of actually beating Crow. He wins, and the next woman who ends up in a wagon has even less hope than you did. That's not my responsibility, isn't it? You said yourself you wanted to be more than just someone things happen to. Well, this is what that looks like. It's ugly and hard and probably going to fail. But at least it's trying. Eliza's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm scared, Caleb. I know, me too. What if trying isn't enough? Then at least we'll know we tried. They walked back to the hotel in silence. In the room, they waited. Caleb at the window, Eliza on the bed, both of them watching the light fade from the sky. Near 7, there was a knock. Ashford entered, and Caleb knew from her face it wasn't good news. I tried, she said. Every merchant I know, every business that might extend credit. They're all too scared of Crow. He's made it clear that anyone who helps you will face consequences. So that's it, Eliza said. We're done. Not yet. Ashford hesitated. There is one more option. A man I know, he runs a freight business, independent of Crow. He's willing to post the bond. Why? Caleb asked immediately. What's he want in return? A favor, unspecified. He says you'll owe him, and someday he'll collect. That's insane. We'd be trading one threat for another. Maybe. But you'd be free. Free to fight this case, to expose Crow to actually have a chance. Ashford looked between them. It's your choice. Take the deal and stay free, or refuse and go to territorial holding tonight. Caleb looked at Eliza. She looked back at him, and he saw in her expression the same calculation he was making. How much are you willing to risk? How far are you willing to go? What price is freedom worth? Who is this man? Eliza asked. His name is Jacob Reeves. He owns the Silver Star Freight Company. Been fighting with Crow over routes and contracts for years. So he wants to hurt Crow. Among other things, yes. And he thinks we can do that. He thinks you're already doing it. He just wants to make sure you finish the job. Caleb ran his hand through his hair, thinking. They were running out of options, out of time, out of everything except stubborn refusal to quit. Tell him yes, he said. Caleb, Eliza started. We're not going to jail, not tonight, not like this. He looked at Ashford. Tell Reeves we'll take his deal. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out later. Ashford nodded. I'll have the bond posted within the hour. Stay here until I confirm it's processed. She left. Caleb and Eliza sat in the growing darkness, neither of them speaking. Outside, somewhere in Tucson, Crow was regrouping, planning, finding new ways to use the system against them, but they were still free, still fighting, and tomorrow they'd figure out what came next. The bond was posted by 9 that night. Ashford brought the papers herself, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes sharp. You're free until the trial, she said, handing Caleb the documentation. Reeves kept his word. You're in his debt now. When does he collect? Eliza asked. He didn't say. Just told me to tell you he'd be in touch. Ashford gathered her things. In the meantime, we have bigger problems. Crow's lawyers filed an emergency motion with Judge Morrison. They're claiming Farrow overstepped his authority. Can Morrison overturn Farrow's ruling? Caleb asked. He can try. Federal versus territorial jurisdiction is murky enough that both judges could claim authority. If Morrison pushes hard enough, this becomes a legal tangle that could take months to resolve. Months we don't have, Eliza said. No, which is why we need to force Crow's hand, make him show his cards before he's ready. Ashford pulled out a folded newspaper from her bag. I took the liberty of speaking with the Tucson Citizen. They're running a story tomorrow morning. Front page. She unfolded it. The headline read, Trafficker uses courts to reclaim victim. Below it, a smaller line, Local woman fights for freedom in landmark case. Caleb scanned the article. It laid out the basics. Eliza's appearance in the wagon, Crow's claim of ownership, the marriage certificate, the competing legal motions. It named Crow specifically and quoted Ashford extensively about the misuse of property law. This is dangerous, Caleb said. It's necessary. Right now this fight is happening in shadows. Crow's comfortable there. But if we drag it into daylight, make it public, he loses his biggest advantage. He also gets desperate. Desperate men do desperate things. So do desperate women, Ashford said, looking at Eliza. The reporter wants to interview you tomorrow afternoon. Your story, in your words, for everyone to read. Eliza took the newspaper, reading it slowly. When she looked up, something had changed in her expression. What would I say? The truth. Where you came from. What was done to you. Why you're fighting. Ashford's voice softened. I know it's asking a lot, putting yourself on display like that. But stories like yours, they change minds. They make people uncomfortable. And uncomfortable people start asking questions. Questions Crow can't control, Eliza said quietly. Exactly. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll do it. They slept poorly that night. Caleb kept waking to sounds that weren't there, his hand going to the gun he'd placed under his pillow. Eliza tossed and turned, caught in dreams she didn't talk about when morning came. The interview was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the newspaper office. They arrived early, Caleb insisting on checking every exit and sightline. The reporter was a woman in her 30s named Catherine Wells, with ink on her fingers and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Thorne, she said, standing to greet them. Thank you for agreeing to this. Just Eliza is fine. Eliza, then. Wells gestured to a chair. I want you to understand, this interview will be published exactly as you tell it. No embellishment, no softening. If we're going to do this, it needs to be honest. I understand. Caleb moved to the corner of the room, giving them space, but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Wells pulled out a notepad and pencil. Let's start at the beginning, she said. Where were you before you ended up in that wagon? Eliza took a breath. I was in a boarding house in Yuma, working as a seamstress. The pay was terrible, but it was honest work. Or I thought it was. What changed? The woman who ran the house told me I owed more than I'd earned. Room and board, she said. Expenses I hadn't agreed to, but that she'd documented in her books. When I said I'd leave and find other work, she told me I couldn't, that I was bound by contract until the debt was paid. Wells wrote rapidly. Did you sign this contract? I signed papers when I first arrived. I thought they were just housing agreements. I didn't... Eliza's voice cracked slightly. I didn't read them carefully enough, and by the time I understood what they really said, it was too late. What happened next? Men came. 2 of them. They said the debt had been sold, that I belonged to someone else now. They put me in that wagon and told me I was being delivered to my new owner. Eliza's hands were shaking. She clasped them together. I screamed. I fought. It didn't matter. They tied me up and left me in the dark, and I thought that was it, that I'd just disappear and nobody would ever know what happened to me. But you didn't disappear. No, I ended up at Caleb Thorne's ranch, and he cut me loose instead of claiming me. Wells looked up from her notes. That must have been surprising. It was. I didn't trust it at first. Didn't trust him. How could I? Every man I'd encountered in weeks had treated me like cargo. Why would he be different? Why was he? Eliza glanced at Caleb. I'm still figuring that out. But I think he knows what it's like to feel powerless. and he decided he wasn't going to be part of making someone else feel that way. The interview continued for another hour. Wells asked hard questions about the conditions in the wagon, about the forged documents, about the marriage. Eliza answered all of them, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. When they finished, Wells set down her pencil. "This will run tomorrow," she said. "Front page, full story. You should know, Crow will come after you for this. He'll claim defamation, probably try to get an injunction to stop publication." "Let him try," Eliza said. They left the newspaper office as the sun began its descent. On the street, people were going about their business, completely unaware that tomorrow morning their newspaper would carry a story that might change everything. Back at the hotel, they found a message waiting. Marshal Hendricks wanted to see them, immediately. They found him at his office, looking more tired than Caleb had ever seen him. "We have a problem," Hendricks said without preamble. "Another one?" Caleb asked. "Judge Morrison issued a ruling. He's claiming federal jurisdiction supersedes territorial authority. Says Farrow had no right to grant the transfer, and he's reinstated the arrest warrant." Eliza went pale. "When?" "Effective immediately. I've got deputies from Santa Fe arriving on tonight's stage. They'll be here by morning." "Then we leave now," Caleb said, "before they arrive." "And go where?" Hendricks leaned against his desk. "Morrison's warrant is federal. It's valid in every territory and state. You run, they'll chase, and when they catch you, and they will catch you, you'll have added fleeing to the charges." "So what are we supposed to do? Just surrender?" "I'm working on getting Morrison's ruling challenged, but that takes time we don't have." Hendricks pulled out a telegram. "However, there might be another option. The territorial governor's office sent this an hour ago. They're launching an investigation into Morrison's connections to Crow. If they can prove judicial corruption, Morrison's rulings get vacated." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, maybe months." "We don't have weeks." "I know." Hendricks looked at them both. "Which is why I'm telling you this off the record. If you were to, say, make yourself unavailable for arrest for the next few days, just long enough for the governor's people to do their work, I wouldn't look too hard for you." Caleb stared at him. "You're telling us to run." "I'm telling you that sometimes the law needs time to catch up with justice, and sometimes people need to give it that time." They left the marshal's office and walked without speaking for several blocks. Finally, Eliza stopped. "We can't keep running," she said. "Even if we buy a few days, then what? We're still at the mercy of judges and lawyers and men who see me as property. What's the alternative?" "We make them see me differently. We force it." Eliza's voice was fierce. "That interview tomorrow, it's a start, but it's not enough. We need something bigger, something Crow can't ignore or buy his way out of." "Like what?" She thought for a moment. "Crow's entire operation depends on silence, on victims being too scared or ashamed to speak up, on records being coded and hidden, on the system protecting him because nobody wants to look too closely. So we break the silence. No, we shatter it completely." Eliza turned to face him. "You said Peter had months of records, documentation of shipments, transactions, all coded. What if we decode them, put names and faces to the numbers, and then we publish it? All of it. Every victim, every transaction, every official who looked the other way." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "That would destroy Crow." "That's the idea. It would also paint an even bigger target on us. He'd come after us with everything he has. He's already doing that. At least this way, we'd be hitting back." They spent the rest of the evening planning. Ashford, when they brought her the idea, was initially skeptical. "This is beyond risky," she said. "You're talking about exposing not just Crow, but everyone connected to him. That includes judges, shipping clerks, freight operators, maybe even federal officials. These people will fight back." "Good," Eliza said. "Let them fight in the open for once." Ashford studied her, then nodded slowly. "I can work with Catherine Wells, get her access to the records, help her decode them. But we'll need protection while we do it. If Crow finds out what we're planning before we publish, he'll try to stop us," Caleb finished, "which means we need to move fast." They worked through the night. Ashford brought Peter's records to the newspaper office, where Wells had assembled a team of reporters. They divided the documents, each person taking a section to decode and verify. Caleb watched them work, marveling at how quickly scribbled codes became names, dates, destinations. Each entry represented a person whose life had been bought and sold like livestock. Some of the names they recognized from other cases. Others were completely unknown, people who disappeared into Crow's system without a trace. Near midnight, Wells called them over. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a ledger page. "This shipment from 6 months ago. Destination listed as Private Holding Prescott, but the coded notation here," she tapped a series of numbers, "that's a payment to a J. Morrison." "Judge Morrison?" Eliza asked. "The amounts match. Regular payments every month going back 2 years. Wells looked up. "This isn't just corruption. This is partnership. Crow's been paying Morrison to run interference on his operations." "Can you prove it?" Caleb asked. "The records prove payment. Proving what the payments were for will be harder. But combined with Morrison's ruling pattern, how many cases involving Crow or his associates he's decided in Crow's favor, we can build a circumstantial case that'll be hard to ignore." "When can you publish?" "We'll need another day to verify everything. Make sure the sources are solid. Then we run it." "We don't have another day," Ashford said. "Deputies arrive tomorrow morning. Then we run it tomorrow morning, early edition. Get it on the street before the deputies even know what hit them." They worked until dawn, finalizing the story, checking facts, preparing for the storm that was coming. When the first edition rolled off the press at 6 in the morning, Caleb held a copy and read the headline: "Territorial Trafficking Ring Exposed. Judge, Businessmen Implicated in Years of Abuse." The article was devastating. Names, dates, transactions, Peter's coded records, now decoded and laid bare. Testimony from Eliza and others Wells had tracked down, and prominently featured Judge Morrison's financial connection to Crow's operation. "This is going to explode," Wells said, watching the papers being bundled for distribution. "That's what we're counting on," Eliza replied. They didn't have long to wait. By 8 in the morning, the story was everywhere. People on the street reading it, talking about it. Shop owners discussing it. And at the courthouse, chaos. Caleb and Eliza stood across the street, watching officials rush in and out. Then they saw him, Silas Crow, striding toward the building with his lawyers flanking him. His face was calm, but Caleb could see the tension in his shoulders. "He knows," Eliza said. "Yeah." "What do we do now?" "We wait. Let the story do its work." They didn't have to wait long. By noon, a telegram arrived from the territorial governor's office. Morrison was being suspended pending investigation. All his rulings and cases connected to Crow were being reviewed, and federal marshals, real ones from outside Morrison's sphere of influence, were being sent to Tucson to take over the investigation. Ashford brought them the news, barely able to contain her excitement. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it. Morrison's done. Crow's operation is being dismantled, and your warrant," she grinned, "just got vacated pending review of Morrison's involvement." Eliza sat down slowly. "We're free?" "You're free. For now. There'll still be proceedings, probably a trial to determine the validity of Crow's original claim. But without Morrison protecting him, Crow doesn't have the leverage he did." Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite hope. He was too cautious for that. But maybe possibility. The sense that the future wasn't entirely written yet. They celebrated quietly that night. No grand gestures, just dinner at a small restaurant where nobody bothered them. Eliza ate slowly, seeming to actually taste the food for the first time since Caleb had known her. "What happens next?" she asked. "We keep fighting. Make sure the investigation actually follows through. Testify if we have to." "I mean, after that. When it's really over." Caleb considered. "I don't know. Go back to the ranch, I guess. Try to rebuild what got torn apart." "Alone?" He looked at her. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want those annulment papers or not." Eliza was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that, about what this marriage started as and what it's become." And I don't know. A week ago, I was cargo. Now I'm a person again, maybe even someone with choices. I'm not sure I'm ready to make big decisions about the future when the present is still so complicated. That's fair. But I know I don't want to disappear, don't want to go back to being invisible. She met his eyes. So maybe I don't know where I'm going, but I know I'm not going alone. Not if I can help it. Caleb reached across the table, offered his hand. She took it. "One day at a time," he said. "One day at a time." The trial, When it finally happened 3 weeks later was anticlimactic. With Morrison removed and the investigation ongoing, Crow's lawyers couldn't sustain their property claim. The marriage certificate stood as legal proof that Eliza couldn't be owned, and the coded records, now public, had exposed enough of Crow's operation that prosecutors were building criminal cases that would take years to fully prosecute. Crow himself disappeared before he could be arrested. Rumors said he'd fled to Mexico, or maybe California. Some said he was dead, killed by business partners who didn't want him talking to federal investigators. Caleb didn't care. As long as Crow was gone, the rest was just details. Standing on the courthouse steps after the final ruling, Eliza looked at the marriage certificate in her hand. "So," she said, "do you still want to give me those annulment papers?" Caleb thought about it, really thought about it, about how this woman had arrived at his ranch as cargo and refused to stay broken. About how she'd stood in courtrooms and newspaper offices and testified to things most people would want to forget. About how she'd turned something meant to be temporary into something that felt more real than most permanent things in his life. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want a choice. Not because I have to choose, but because I can." "And what are you choosing?" Eliza folded the certificate carefully. "I'm choosing to see where this goes. No promises about forever, no guarantees. Just let's see what tomorrow brings and decide from there. I can work with that." They rode out of Tucson the next morning, heading back toward the ranch. The desert was the same as it had always been, harsh and beautiful and indifferent to human drama. But somehow it looked different now, more open, full of possibility instead of just emptiness. At the ranch, they found things much as they'd left them. The wagon was still there, a reminder of how everything had started. Caleb thought about burning it, but Eliza had a different idea. "Let's take it apart," she said. "Use the wood for something else. Build something new from what was meant to cage me." So they did. Over the next weeks, they dismantled the wagon board by board. Caleb used the wood to repair his fence, to build a new porch, to create things that were useful instead of cruel. Eliza found work in Copper Springs, helping Dr. Webb with patients who needed someone who understood trauma. She was good at it, people said, had a way of making people feel seen. She kept the room at Caleb's ranch, though nobody called it that anymore. It was their ranch now, legally speaking. Though they still maintained separate beds, separate spaces. The marriage was real in the eyes of the law, but they were figuring out what it meant between them at their own pace. Some nights they talked until late, sharing stories about who they'd been before all this. Other nights they sat in comfortable silence, just existing in the same space without needing to fill it with words. It wasn't perfect. Eliza still had nightmares. Caleb still struggled with letting people get close. They argued sometimes about small things that were really about bigger fears neither of them knew how to name. But it was real. Messy and complicated and uncertain, but real. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived from Jacob Reeves, the man who'd posted their bond. It was brief. "Consider your debt paid. What you did exposed corruption that was hurting my business and my people. We're even." Caleb showed it to Eliza. "That's it?" she asked. "No catch?" "Apparently not. People can surprise you." "Yeah, they can." A year passed, then another. The story of Crow's trafficking ring faded from headlines, replaced by new scandals and crises. But the changes it had sparked continued. New laws protecting workers, stricter oversight of labor contracts, federal investigations into other suspected trafficking operations. Catherine Wells won awards for her reporting. Miranda Ashford built a practice defending people caught in predatory contracts. Marshall Hendricks was promoted to regional marshal, overseeing a larger territory. And on a small ranch in Arizona, 2 people who'd started as strangers bound by necessity built something that looked like a life. One morning, Caleb woke to find Eliza sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise. "You're up early," he said, joining her. "Couldn't sleep. Been thinking." "About?" "About choice. How I spent so long without it that I didn't trust it when I had it. How I kept waiting for someone to take it away again. And now? Now I think I'm starting to believe it's real, that I get to decide things, stay or go, fight or walk away, keep this marriage or end it." She looked at him. "All of it. My choice." "What are you choosing?" Eliza smiled. "I'm choosing tomorrow and the day after, and however many days we get before we have to choose again." It wasn't the ending either of them had expected. There was no dramatic resolution, no perfect moment where everything made sense, just two imperfect people deciding that imperfect was good enough. Because in the end, that's what freedom looked like. Not some grand transformation, not becoming someone new, just the simple, radical act of choosing your own path and walking it, even when you didn't know exactly where it led. The sun rose higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, other people were fighting their own battles, making their own impossible choices. The world kept turning, kept breaking, kept giving people chances to decide who they wanted to be. Caleb had spent years trying to avoid those choices, had built a life small enough that it couldn't hurt him. And then a wagon had appeared at his fence, carrying a woman who refused to stay broken, and everything had changed. He'd cut her loose instead of claiming her, had fought for her instead of walking away, had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone matter to you, even when it scared you, even when it might not work out. And she'd taught him something even more important, that people weren't defined by what was done to them, but by what they chose to do next. They sat together as the morning warmed, not needing to speak. Two people who'd been delivered into each other's lives by cruelty and had chosen over and over to build something better from it. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was theirs, and that was enough.